Chapter 21. Blood. I jiggled about impatiently as Dad asked Dr. Bryce about the weather in Yorkshire. When was he going to get to the point? No, Cameron's fine. He wants to go swimming tomorrow, so I thought I'd check with you first, said Dad. And from his tone of voice it sounded as if he wanted the doctor to say no. Yes, okay, I'll put him on, he said reluctantly and handed me the phone. Hi, Dr. Bryce. Hello, Cameron, how are you feeling? Fine, thanks. I'll be down on Friday to give you a weekly check-up, said Dr. Bryce. You're doing so well, I think we can make them fortnightly, and we'll see about the local hospital taking over some of your care. Great, I replied. Can I go swimming tomorrow? Well, swimming is very good exercise, so I don't see why not, as long as you don't overdo it. Take it easy and don't stay in for longer than half an hour. Don't forget, you've got to build up slowly. We don't want to push it. Don't worry, I'll be careful. I grinned down the phone. Could you pass me back to your father, please? Asked the doctor. I gave the phone back to Dad. Dr. Price says I can go, I told him, and I charged up the stairs. I could make it all the way to the top without pausing or having to stop to catch my breath. I still couldn't get over that. Dr. Bryce isn't your dad, Dad called after me, adding apologetically, Excuse me, Dr. Bryce, I didn't mean to yell in your ear. I stuck my head over the banister on the landing, can I go or not? Cam, I'm on the phone. Dad! Just a sec. Dr. Bryce. Dad put his hand over the mouthpiece. Okay, but I'll come with you. No way! I was appalled. I'm not dragging you around with me everywhere I go, like unwanted luggage. Thank you very much. Dad raised his eyebrows. No, I mean it, Dad. You can't come with me. I'd never live it down. All the other boys would think I was a right sissy. Dad frowned. Oh, all right, then you can go, but only if you promise to... I promise, I called back and ran to my room. I was going swimming, and this was only the start. At that moment, I really truly believed I was going to live forever, and it felt wonderful. When at last the buzzer sounded, half the class leapt out of their seats before Mr. Stewart could finish his sentence. Complete the next two exercises for your homework, and I want it first thing on Thursday morning, and no excuses, Dr. Stewart shouted above the noise. He legged it out of the room, leaving us to it. I was going swimming immediately after school, but at that moment I wasn't thinking about swimming. I'd only had one thing on my mind, Julie. I marched straight over to her table, where she stood talking to her friends. Julie, I said, standing behind her. When she turned, I deliberately coughed in her face without covering my mouth. That would teach her. She shied away, wiping her face vigorously with her hands. I'm just giving you some of my piggy germs, I told her viciously. I walked back to my desk, aware that everyone in the class was watching. I sat down. Marlon turned to look at me, but he didn't say a word. Andrew prodded me in the back. Cam, that wasn't very nice. Neither was what she said to me yesterday, I reminded him. And that makes it okay, does it? Andrew asked. I glared at him, but as I looked around the class, I saw something I'd never seen on the faces of everyone around me. Dislike. As I turned to look at Julie, to my horror I saw that she was crying. It was such a shock. I thought she'd flare up or scream at me or call me all the names under the sun, but she was crying. I bent my head and pretended to be looking for something in my bag, but inside I was choking up. I was so ashamed of myself, I felt like dirt. How could I have done that? All day I've been thinking of some way to get my own back on Julie and everyone else like her who thought I was untouchable. So now that I'd done it, why didn't I feel any better? I retrieved a crumpled but clean tissue from my bag and went over to Julie. Without a word, I held it out to her. She knocked my hand away and turned her back on me. The tissue fluttered to the ground. I went back to my desk knowing that I'd blown it. You've changed since your operation. Do you know that? Andrew told me as we walked along. No, I haven't. Yes, you have. How? It was as if every atom in my body had become still, waiting for the answer. You're more pushy, said Andrew. I think the word you're looking for is confident, I said. And you're more arrogant. Andrew was getting into his stride now. Sure of myself, I corrected. Full of yourself, Andrew amended. I looked at Rashid and Marlon. They didn't say a word, but it was obvious who they agreed with. And where did all this come from? I asked bitterly. Before you would never have treated Julie like that, no matter what the provocation, Andrew replied without hesitation. That was more like something Travis would do. That stung. So you think all this is because of my new heart, do you? I asked scathingly. I'm not Julie, said Andrew. A heart is just a pump. It's not the real It's not the real you, that's all. But you're saying that the real me has become pushy and arrogant just because I stand up for myself now? I don't know, Andrew shrugged. Maybe it's just the contrast. Before you wouldn't say boo to a flea, and now it's like you don't take any prisoners. We carried on walking in silence. The frown on my face cut deeper and deeper. Any second now and it would be visible on the back of my head, and that was what my friends thought. Was that really who I was becoming? Rashid and Andrew started chatting about something else, and I walked on ahead, leaving Marlon and me trailed behind. I tried to find something to say. I risked a quick glance at Marlon. He had his hand in his jacket pocket and was looking very smart. Nice jacket. It came out of my mouth from nowhere. Faster than I could blink, Marlon's face whooshed bright red. I knew I was right. Andrew and Rashid were ahead of us by a couple of metres, and I wanted to say it that way. This was between me and Marlon. And those shoes are nice too, right? Yes, Marlon mumbled. I suppose your whole family have new clothes now. What else did you all buy? A new car, new furniture, new house? We haven't got a new house. And Dad only sold your story so that we could keep our old one, Marlon rounded me. I frowned. What are you talking about? The bank were about to repossess our house because my mum and Dad couldn't afford the mortgage anymore. Since Dad lost his job, things have been really hard for us. I glared at Marlon. I know that doesn't excuse what Dad did or make it right, Marlon continued hastily, but that's why he did it, so we wouldn't lose our home. Your mum and Dad were meant to be friends with my family. I couldn't keep the frost out of my voice. I bet my dad wouldn't do something like that, no matter how close he was to losing his house. Yeah, right, Marlon began to raise his voice. So what would your dad do? Let you all get chucked out on the pavement? He wouldn't have betrayed you to keep his house. Are you sure about that? Marlon asked. Are you telling me that if you were in my dad's shoes, you wouldn't have done exactly the same thing? My mouth snapped shut. I thought about Marlon's dad, desperately trying to think of a way to keep his home. Would I really have done any different? Marlon and I walked on in silence. Andrew and Rashid cast the occasional glance back at us. They were probably wondering what all the raised voices were about. What would you have done? I asked curiously. Marlon shrugged. To be honest, I don't know. I don't like to think I could have done the same thing, but I don't know. Did your dad pay off the mortgage then? I asked at last. Yeah, the mortgage arrears and all the other debts Mum and Dad had paid off. They were just enough money left over for a new pair of shoes for me and Tasha and a new jacket for me. We're not about to jet off to the Bahamas for a holiday, believe me. I sighed. What was I going to do, bear a grudge or let it go? Well, it's done now, I shrugged. My bleating about it isn't going to change that. Silence. So how's Tasha? I asked. This was ridiculous. Marlon and I were struggling to find things to say to each other. We never had to do that before. Usually the two of us could talk about anything and everything, and we did, but not today. I wondered if we ever would again. Tasha's fine. Her class went to the Science Museum today, I think, Marlon replied. We carried on talking, floundering silence until Rashid and Andrew took pity on us. They took over the conversation then, talking about the last time both of them had visited the Science Museum. Marlon and I lapsed back into silence. I sighed inwardly. It was really like scraping the bottom of the barrel when I had to ask Marlon about his younger sister. Marlon and I joined in the conversation, but I noticed that we only ever spoke in response to what Andrew or Rashid said. By the time we reached the swimming pool, I was desperate for Marlon and me to behave normally with each other again. I tried smiling at him to let him know that everything was okay, but although he smiled back, he didn't seem to have much to say. Things will be better once we're in the pool, I told myself. Marlon, Andrew and the others always had fun in the pool, only this time I'd be having fun with them. Who's on for a daredevil dive? Andrew laughed. I am. I got in before anyone else could answer. Suddenly all my friends' eyes were on me. Are you sure? Andrew asked seriously. Yep. Don't you think you should wait a bit first? Asked Rashid. I mean, you have to dive and touch the bottom of the pool in the deep end. That's a long way down. Don't worry, I can handle it. And if I can't get to the bottom, I'll just come up again, that's all. Cam, I'm not sure this is such a good idea, Andrew began. No, if he wants to play daredevil dive, let him. I wasn't the only one who was surprised by Marlon's words. Usually he was the first one to tell me not to do things, to urge me to be cautious. I wondered at his sudden change of heart. Cam hates people who fuss over him, Marlon said, looking directly at me. Besides, he's probably fitter than all of us put together with his new pig's heart. Something inside me went very still and alert when he said that. What was he getting at? Was there a note in his voice, a particular tone I didn't recognise? If you're sure it's safe, Andrew was still doubtful. Don't worry about me, I said. Just prepare to get beaten. Big talk from small peanut head, Andrew laughed. We'll see who's a peanut head, I told him. We all lined up at the side of the pool. I could feel my heart begin to beat faster with anticipation. I was exhilarated. This was something I'd never thought I'd be able to do a few months ago. But I must admit, part of me was a bit scared. I hadn't been at the deep end of the pool since before my heart went bad, and Dr. Bryce had told me not to push it. Ready? Maybe I shouldn't be doing this. Steady? But it was too late now. Go! We all swam out to the middle of the pool, then dived. I kicked my legs, telling myself I could do it. 2 weeks after my operation, I'd been on a running machine at Dr. Bryce's clinic with pods stuck all over my chest so that the doctors could monitor my heart when I exercised. Every day I had to do that. I started off with some gentle walking until by the end of the 6 weeks they had me jogging comfortably. Of course, with the jogging I didn't have to hold my breath as well. I opened my eyes, ignoring how they stung because of the chlorine in the water. I could see that Andrew and Rashid were ahead of me. I had time to wonder where Marlon was before my lungs began to protest, and I could hear my heart hammering and my blood roaring. I wasn't going to make it to the bottom. If I carried up much further, I wouldn't be able to make it back up to the surface either. I turned in the water and headed up again. I could see Marlon just behind me. I passed him and kicked desperately to try and make it back up to the surface before my lungs exploded. When my head emerged from the water, I gasped in air as if my life depended on it, which at that moment was precisely how it felt. I floated on my back while I dragged breath after breath down into my lungs. When at last I felt my racing heart slow down, I turned and swam slowly back to the side of the pool. I obviously wasn't as fit as I thought I was. I mean, I didn't expect to win, although it would have been nice, but I had thought I'd do better. I barely made it halfway down. I thought Marlon wouldn't bother going all the way down to the bottom of the pool. I thought he'd come up and gloat, but he didn't. Andrew emerged first, slowly by Rashid. Marlon came swimming up last. I can't believe it. I beat you, Andrew grinned at Marlon. Marlon shrugged. Everyone has an off day. And what happened to you? Rashid asked me. I smiled. I decided it'd be too humiliating for you if I was to beat you on my very first attempt, so I decided to wait until next week to kick your butt. Same time, same place. You wish. Dream on. I looked at Marlon. We both burst out laughing, and as we laughed, the last of the anger and hurt I felt evaporated. You think you're bad, don't you? Marlon teased. I don't think it. I know it, I replied. It was one of the best afternoons of my life. I couldn't do everything my friends did, but I didn't do it too badly. And best of all, Marlon and I were talking again. I ended up staying in the water for an hour, which was about 45 minutes longer than I usually manage. By the time I got out of the water, I was wrinkled and crinkled as a walnut, but I'd never felt better. I was the first one to get dressed, so I bought myself a packet of salt and vinegar crisps from the leisure centre vending machine. I managed to gobble down 3/4 of the packet before the others arrived. Who's on for a chicken burger and chips? Asked Rashid. You bet. Good idea. Cam, can you have a bacon burger? Andrew told me. Or a couple of pork chops, Rashid laughed, if you don't mind eating your cousins. Andrew was doubled up with laughter now. I glared at him. My lips pursed, my face stony. Blow it out your ear, Rashid, I told him. They all creased up at that. I had to admit my lips did twitch a bit. Eating my cousins. Yuck, what an idea. I'll just go and phone my mum first, I said, licking my salty fingers. She was meant to pick me up and drive me back home. I'll ask her if I can go with you first. Why do you need your mum to drive you back home? Andrew asked. I looked at Marlon, then immediately looked away again. I didn't want him to think I was blaming him, because I wasn't. We've been getting 1 or 2 weirdo letters, that's all, I shrugged. Some people out there think Trudy shouldn't have died to save my life. Trudy? Asked Rashid. That was the name of the pig I got the heart from, I explained. How do you know that? It's a long story. I certainly wasn't going into it that now. Those weird letters, what do they say? Asked Marlon. Just that Mum and Dad and I ought to be ashamed and that we're immoral, that sort of thing. Anyway, if you guys wait here, I'll go and phone Mum. I walked over to the payphone in the foyer before Marlon could ask me any more questions. I could see him getting more upset with every word I said. I didn't want him to feel guilty about it. It wasn't his fault. I stuck my phone card in the slot and dialed Mum's mobile number. She'd written it down on a piece of paper for me, even though I told her not to. I was convinced I'd remember it, but in the end it turned out just to be as well that she did. Mum's mobile was on the hall table next to our still unplugged phone.